مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. أخيرا وبعد 35 يوما انتهى إغلاق حكومة الولايات المتحدة. فتحت المنتزهات الوطنية أبوابها، وفتحت المتاحف أبوابها، وفتحت إدارات كاملة من الحكومة الفيدرالية أبوابها. أكثر من 800 ألف موظف حكومي يعودون عملهم على الأقل لبضعة أسابيع. ما الذي حققه الإغلاق؟ هل كانت هذه سياسة ذكية بالنسبة للديمقراطيين والجمهوريين والرئيس ترامب؟ هل سيتمكن البيت الأبيض والكونغرس من تجنب إغلاق آخر؟ لمناقشة إغلاق الحكومة الفيدرالية وأثره على السياسة الأميركية، يسرني أن أرحب بالمراقبين البارعين لكيف تعمل واشنطن أو لا تعمل، نورمان أورنستين وستيف كليمنز. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. Well, the American government is now open. Well, at least for now. And we will see what it means to have been shut, what the impact is, and whether it's going to shut again. I'm delighted to welcome back our panel of political experts, Steve Clemens and Norm Ornstein. Gentlemen, can the U.S. government, this trillion-dollar operation, really shut down? What does that mean in practice, Norm?
It's actually a $4 trillion operation, and having even a partial shutdown, such as the one that we had, brings great costs. Some of them are going to reverberate for a very long time to come. We're already seeing that many of the top people who were forced to work without pay for a significant period of time are considering whether they want to stay in their jobs, and that includes air traffic controllers, for example. Recruiting people to come into government will be difficult. But many government operations that are significant ones, food safety inspections, airplane inspections and the like, it's going to take weeks or months to get them back up to speed. For people who were processing checks, refunds for from the IRS, and it's mostly
the Internal Revenue
Service. It's mostly people who have relatively low incomes who are really counting on getting their tax refund. It'll take them weeks longer to get that done. The damage is considerable, and for what? For nothing.
So Steve, let's just remind our viewers, this isn't the first time the government shut down, but it is the longest. What triggered the government shutdown?
Well, what triggered was a standoff between President Trump, who changed his mind after a vote had been had that would have funded the government and would have kicked forward a debate on how America should pursue its border security at its southern border with Mexico. And President Trump, after essentially Congress gave him nearly what he asked for in his budget request, decided he wanted a lot more, that he wanted more than $5 billion for a border wall. He's obsessed with a wall. And Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, who had just come into Congress with a new majority in the House of Representatives, said no. And they were in the ascension. They were rising. This is their moment, and the two really collided. Donald Trump was goaded into this by certain right-wing commentators that were basically saying to him that he had no spine and that he was not delivering to his base. Now, it's important to note that he was unable to get this wall funding to the degree he wanted when he had Republicans controlling both the House and the Senate. But this is a case where the Democrats were demonstrating they're the new muscle in at least part of the political equation here. But I think, something that Norm said on the shutdown is very important. Even when I look at the various roles and essential functions of government, didn't realize how pervasively the federal government supports so many things like air traffic control. I was on an airplane landing in Denver, and we did an immediate abort because there was another plane in our airspace because of exhausted air controllers. My life wasn't in danger, but it was a reminder. There were heavy rains in California, and we have people that are out there funded by the federal government that watch how to manage the spillways of various dams and throughways of water that comes in to prevent flooding. We have national parks. We're Joshua Tree National Park in California. People went in without park rangers in there monitoring this and began cutting down some of the most scarce and important national treasures among Joshua trees in California. Lots of this stuff has gone on, and I think people have, because of this longest ever shutdown, a much greater appreciation for the essential role of government and how absurd this shutdown. Whether you're on the Republican side, the Democrat side, this was an absurd situation.
Norm, eventually, this shutdown came to an end, a negotiated end. Who blinked, and are we set for this problem being put behind us, or is this problem just going to rise up again?
So let's answer the latter question first. No, we're not set. What we got was an end to the shutdown, mostly because the pilots and the air traffic controllers said this is becoming extremely unsafe. And the possibility of a tragedy, Steve didn't come close, but we could have had an airplane tragedy, really motivated Congress and finally the president to back down. But they backed down for only 3 weeks. February 15th, looming large now, is another date where we have a group of 17 members of Congress who are meeting now, trying to reach a deal that will be acceptable to the president, that will put this off at least until, say, October, when the next fiscal year begins and we'll have another cycle of appropriations for the budget. But we're nowhere close to a resolution of this right now. And it gets back to something that Steve said. What motivated Donald Trump was pressure from people he cares about, who are over on the extreme right. Ann Coulter, a commentator, Rush Limbaugh, a radio talk show host, Lou Dobbs, a television talk show host on Fox Business, who all told him he could not cave on the wall. This is a president who has focused all of his efforts on his own base, and he's riled up that base over a wall as a symbol of border security and immigration. And what I think and what I hear from Republicans in Congress who would love to get this out of the way and put it past them is that if they reach a deal that doesn't give Trump everything that he wants and that Coulter and Dobbs want, he may set us up for another shutdown again, or, and this is something to keep in mind, he has threatened before that he would declare a state of emergency. And presidents have some broad powers because he says there's an emergency on the southern border, and that would trigger another wave of court cases and real questions about his authority.
But if the president goes down the route of declaring a state of emergency and moves some money from the Pentagon over to start building on the wall, but we have years of court cases, doesn't that effectively solve the problem? We get on with government and the issue is in the courts.
There are lots of things that would solve the problem from a presidential perspective. He could have taken the $1.3 billion for border security and said, "Hey, I'm making progress on this," because it was new spending that could have come along the way and done this. Donald Trump doesn't seem to want a result. He doesn't seem to want a moment where he can have that. What he wants is an ongoing fight or an issue to show that in fact he's brought the government to a very big standstill at enormous cost to the nation to try to satisfy the people that Norm just shared. But that said, even Ann Coulter has called Donald Trump a bigger wimp in her world than President George H.W. Bush, the late president, who she thought was constantly caving into pressures from his political opposition. But I don't think that Donald Trump wants a win on this. I think he wants the continuing festering policy and the battle itself. And that's a very strange problem to have to solve. And we see Nancy Pelosi, the new muscle in town, basically not giving in to that, because she too has a base out there that is saying we're not going to allow our government to be hijacked from someone who's spoiled and saying, I'm no longer going to play the game and I'm going to take my toys home.
So I'm not quite sure how we're going to translate wimp for our Middle East audience. But what about Republicans on Capitol Hill? Do they go along with this confrontation? all the way to the bitter end with the president, or is there a point at which they part company?
Let's go back to the beginning of this confrontation. The Senate, controlled by Republicans, voted unanimously to keep the government open and to move beyond this issue. Then when Donald Trump, goaded by these people on his right, said no, they turned around to be loyal to him. But we all know that privately they don't like any of this, and they're very nervous about Trump declaring a state of emergency, not because they're worried about what Trump would do, but it could set a precedent for the next Democratic president to use it for issues that that president cares about. So Republicans don't like this, but they're frightened enough of him that they are likely to go along up to a point. And the reason is his base, which continues to support him, although that support eroded some because of the shutdown, is their base as well. They do not want to cross or get angry at them, the people that Trump has supporting him, because he will get that base to turn on his fellow Republicans.
Steve, you agree with that?
I largely agree. I think that this is about electoral politics and what goes forward. The question that I think really remains to be seen how it plays out is, while I agree with everything Norm said, I don't know how this president remains president after the 2020 election, or those that are investing so heavily in the 30% of voting Americans who are seem to be satisfied with this kind of brinksmanship politics. No Republican can win just with that, and they are losing. His unfavorable ratings are skyrocketing. His the disdain with which I think independents see what the president has done in his behavior is also rising very rapidly. So as they cling to this one group in highly pugnacious, flamboyant behavior, I think they're losing the rest of the equation. Those Democrats who occasionally vote Republicans and those independents that are the way elections are won or lost today. So in that sense, Norm is right, but I don't know how this helps them in 2020. I look at the case that for Republicans, they are looking at a very dire situation, both in the Senate, further in the House, and potentially in the White House in the next election.
All right, when we come back after the break, we are going to look at the very early campaigning for 2020 and how the government shutdown and other recent political events is already affecting that fundamentally important American political decision. In just a moment. My panelists again today include Norman Ornstein. Norm is resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. Sitting to his left is Steve Clemens, editor of Atlantic Live. All right, gentlemen, lots of politics going on around the same time as the government shutdown. What seems to be a herd of Democratic senators and other candidates putting their name in the hat to become a nominee for the Democratic nomination for president in 2020. Why are they all throwing their name in the hat during the government shutdown? Who are these people, and do any of them really stand a chance of being our next president? Norman, you want to begin with this?
Sure. So for Democrats, there's no obvious heir apparent. There is a belief, going back to what Steve had said earlier, that Donald Trump is extraordinarily vulnerable, assuming he's even still president when 2020 rolls around, that this is the opportunity to run. And frankly, what happens is the more candidates who consider running, the more decide that they're going to run. I've had at least 2 of these candidates who are now either declared or soon to be saying, well, I may not have more than a 5% chance of winning the nomination, but nobody has more than a 10% chance. And if you think that Democrats are likely to win the presidency and there'll be a nominee and then somebody else chosen as the vice president, you may be shut out of the possibility of running for president for a very long time. So try it now. So we're getting many senators who have already declared or at least begun the process of declaring, including at least 2 African Americans, 1 African American woman, a senator from California, Kamala Harris, and Cory Booker of New Jersey, an African American man. We have a Hispanic candidate, Joaquin Castro, who is in the cabinet, former mayor. We have other senators who are joining the race, and we're going to have a series of governors and probably some mayors and other outsiders getting in. And it's also important to mention, we may come back to this, that Howard Schultz, the founder and billionaire proprietor of Starbucks Coffee, has begun to consider running as an independent, which could throw a complete wrench into the nature of our presidential politics and would be great news for Donald Trump, who's already said he'd be thrilled to have Howard Schultz in the race.
And Steve, who is the front runner, as it were? Any of the candidates that Nora mentioned, or somebody who hasn't even thrown his or her hat into the ring?
Well, there are lots of front runners, but I would say that among those that Norm mentioned, the senator from California, Kamala Harris, automatically has a leg up to a front runner status because California has become such a consequential base, particularly for Democrats, in defining aspirationally what the nation may want or what it could achieve. And so she's up there, and she's an African-American candidate, a female candidate in the Me Too era. That we see spreading globally, but very importantly in the United States. But I think there are unannounced candidates that are also part of this. I think former Vice President Joe Biden, if he announces, would be in that tier. I think former Mayor Mike Bloomberg of New York would be there. And I think as we begin looking at this, we've already seen some campaigns sputter a little bit. We have a campaign of Tulsi Gabbard, who's a House member from Hawaii. Some, kind of out of step in some ways, particularly on foreign policy with her Democratic Party, but there are already a lot of rumors about how dysfunctional her team is. So when you look at the three areas of money, ability to organize, and the question of what differentiates their ideas from a very crowded field, this is how we're going to see the battle unfold between Democrats. And I, for one, would love to see a battle of ideas, not just a battle of personalities or positions or things, brand names, whether it's Joaquin Castro or, we end up seeing various mayors or governors come into the race. But I think the question is do we see compelling ideas that help Americans understand a pathway on healthcare and the cost of healthcare? Do we see a place where, with the job transitions that are going on, where so much is becoming more automated, are people going to bring in genuinely workable proposals in that area? We forget about ideas in a world where personalities are flooding into the.
So let me ask you about this, because the 2016 Republican campaign, when there were so many candidates, 17, showed us that Donald Trump was able to do well as being the loudest and most extreme candidate in a broad field. Will that be the model for the Democratic field? Will the most extreme and loudest candidates do well, or somebody more thoughtful in the center?
There are a lot of Democrats who are very worried that we could see a parallel with what happened with the Republicans. And remember, the Republicans, with 17 candidates, ended up having a series of debates. Most of them were not well known, where there were 10 or so on a main stage getting major national attention, and the primary and caucus voters paid attention, and the rest were on what they called a kiddie stage and really weren't able to get anywhere. Democrats are not going to do that. But when you have these debates, and they're mostly not known to the nation as a whole, maybe you'll get 7 minutes to make a case. And if the zeitgeist at the time is anger over and frustration over the inability to curb Trump's excesses, the angry candidate could prevail. We should mention one name, though, that is in that front tier right now, who was an unexpected one, Beto O'Rourke, who ran unsuccessfully for the Senate from Texas, but came much closer than a lot of people had expected in a very Republican state against Ted Cruz, who ran for president, who's a real target for Democrats, an extreme conservative. But Beto O'Rourke, a younger man who'd been in the House of Representatives, who got an enormous amount of national attention, had huge numbers of volunteers, built a tremendous fundraising base. Barack Obama likes Beto O'Rourke, and a lot of the people around Obama see him as the next Obama, the new fresh face who will change a party which has as its prominent faces people like Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden, who are in their late 70s. So pay attention to dark horses, to younger figures who may catch a wave here as well, and on a more positive front.
And we should make sure we mention Elizabeth Warren, because Elizabeth Warren is automatically a front runner here as well. But Elizabeth Warren represents a problem in a way that the Democrats have, which is a kind of unannounced civil war between centrists and those that want to see a very big reshuffling in the economic distributions in the economy. And Elizabeth Warren may be taking that place that we saw Bernie Sanders play in the last election and coming in. And this is something that really deeply worries people who want to unseat Donald Trump, that if you had a candidate who's perceived to be on the far left, which is where Elizabeth Warren is perceived to be, then that could actually drive the independents back to Donald Trump, despite all the other things we've talked about.
And do we expect Bernie Sanders himself to run again?
Yes, he's preparing another campaign, and Democrats are worried about the disruptive force that he could provide. And remember that Bernie Sanders had not been a Democrat for a day in his life before he ran for the nomination in 2016. Right. And once the election was over, once he lost the nomination, he gave up his Democratic Party identity and now is trying to get it back again. So there are a lot of forces out there that could pull the party apart or could create a different dynamic for that 2020 election.
Steve, Norm, you've just outlined the content agenda for Dakhel, Washington for the year ahead. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us today.
Thank you, Rob.
I'm not American, but I like Trump. I like the things that he is doing for the country, and I think the future will see that will show that this was something that had to be done right now.
Government is a very old word. It is derived from a French word, which comes from Latin, which has its origin in the ancient Greek word kybernan, which means to pilot a ship. What an appropriate route, because our government has been tossed like a rowboat in a hurricane. That's because for 35 days, the American government, or at least large pieces of it, was shut down. This wasn't the first time our government closed, but it was the longest. No government shutdown makes any sense, and this one followed that form. Yes, there's lots of blame to go around. Blame on the president, who couldn't get what he wanted from Congress when Republicans were in control of both houses, and is suddenly surprised that he can't get what he wants when Democrats have won one of them back. And blame on the Democratic leadership of the House, which is so dizzy with delight after the thumping it gave Republicans in November that they forgot they're supposed to be the party of working men and women, including the 800,000 who didn't get a paycheck because a bunch of alleged grown-ups couldn't figure out a graceful compromise. The result was that the ship of state, our government, had no rudder, no sails, no direction. We were foundering. There may be some out there who were delighted at the prospect of a government shutting down. Anarchists, gadflies, mean-spirited people on the far right and the far left. I am certainly not one of them. To me, there is something profoundly unnatural when the government that Lincoln said should be of the people, by the people, and for the people no longer functions. To me, there is something unethical about asking civil servants to perform important functions, like the thousands keeping us safe at airports, without getting paid. And to me, there is something small, yes, small, about keeping our government and its thousands of workers hostage to a disagreement that grown men and women should be able to resolve around a bargaining table. The great philosopher Edmund Burke once said, "Nothing turns out to be so oppressive and unjust as a feeble government. A government that can't even open its doors in the morning is truly a feeble government." We don't expect the ship of state to be the Love Boat, but we don't expect it to be the Titanic either. Enough is enough. Does any other government in the world ever shut down? No. And I hope ours doesn't ever shut down again. بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول أثر إغلاق الحكومة الفيدرالية، أرجو أن تتواصلوا معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاغ InsideWashington أو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. سأراكم الأسبوع المقبل، وإلى أن ألقاكم شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.